Imagine standing in the vast scorching sands of Egypt. We all know the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx. For centuries, historians have been arguing about who built these massive structures. We believe the Egyptians were the first true masters of engineering. But what if I told you that beneath the limestone and the dust something even older has been hiding? Recently, a group of scientists uncovered artifacts that simply should not exist. These items show a level of precision that even our modern machines struggle to match. We are talking about drills that cut through solid granite like butter and stone surfaces polished to a mirror finish long before the first pharaoh ever wore a crown. Experts are now scratching their brains wondering if our history is all wrong. Some believe this is proof of a lost civilization with advanced technology. Welcome to a discovery that changes everything. Imagine you are standing in the middle of the Egyptian desert. The sun is beating down on the golden sand, and right in front of you are the Great Pyramids of Giza. They are the last of the 7 wonders of the ancient world still standing today. Most history books tell us that these massive structures were built about 4,500 years ago. They say they were tombs for the pharaohs and that they were constructed using simple tools like copper chisels and wooden sleds. But what if that is only half of the story? What if the most iconic monuments on our planet were actually built on top of something much older and much more advanced? This is a question that is starting to keep archaeologists and scientists up at night. They are finding whispers of a lost civilization that might have lived in Egypt thousands of years before the first pharaoh ever wore a crown. For a long time, we thought we knew everything there was to know about the Giza Plateau. But recently, scientists decided to use some high-tech equipment to peek inside the Great Pyramid. They use a technique called muon tomography. This sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but it is very real. Muons are tiny subatomic particles that come from space. They are constantly raining down on Earth. These particles can pass through almost anything, but they slow down or get absorbed when they hit something very dense like solid rock. By placing special detectors around the pyramid, scientists can track how these muons travel through the stone. It is basically like taking a giant X-ray of the pyramid. In 2017, this technology revealed something shocking. They found a massive empty space inside the Great Pyramid that no one knew existed. It is at least 100 feet long, and it is sitting right above the Grand Gallery. They called it the Big Void. Now, the weirdest part is that there are no known hallways or tunnels leading to this space. It is just a giant hidden room floating in the middle of millions of tons of stone. Historians are still arguing about what it could be. Some think it was just a space left behind to help balance the weight of the pyramid. But others believe it might contain the true secrets of who built this place. Now let us move a few miles away to a place called Saqqara. This is home to the famous Step Pyramid, but it is also home to one of the most mysterious places in all of Egypt. It is called the Serapeum. To get there, you have to go deep underground into a network of dark tunnels. Inside these tunnels are 24 massive stone boxes made of solid granite. Each of these boxes is huge. We are talking about containers that are 13 feet long and 11 feet high. They weigh about 70 tons each, and the lids on top weigh another 30 tons. That means each completed box is as heavy as 2 Boeing 737 airplanes. When you look at these boxes, you start to realize why scientists are so confused. They are made of Aswan granite, which is one of the hardest rocks on Earth. To cut this stone today, we would need diamond-tipped saws and heavy machinery. But the ancient Egyptians supposedly only had copper tools. Copper is a soft metal. If you tried to cut granite with copper, it would be like trying to cut a brick with a butter knife. It just does not work. But the real kicker is the precision. When researchers measured the inside of these granite boxes, they found that the corners were perfect 90-degree angles. The surfaces are so flat that they are accurate to within a few thousandths of an inch. Even with our best modern technology, this would be a very hard task to complete. Why would ancient people go to all that trouble to make perfectly flat boxes in a dark underground tunnel? And how did they move these 100-ton blocks through narrow hallways where you can barely fit a few people? Some researchers believe these boxes were not made by the Egyptians we know. They think they are the leftovers of an older civilization that had access to advanced power tools or machines we do not understand yet. This idea of an older civilization is not just a wild guess. It is backed up by some interesting clues found on the Sphinx. The Great Sphinx is a giant statue with the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh. Most people believe it was carved around 2500 before the Common Era. But back in the 1990s, a geologist named Robert Schoch took a look at the weathering on the Sphinx, and his findings shocked the world. He noticed that the erosion on the body of the Sphinx and the walls around it was not caused by wind and sand. Instead, it was caused by heavy rainfall. Now, this is a big problem for traditional history. Egypt has been a dry desert for at least 5,000 years. For the Sphinx to show that much water erosion, it would have to have been sitting there during a time when Egypt was a lush green land with regular rainstorms. The last time that happened was at the end of the last ice age, which was at least 10,000 years ago. If the Sphinx is really that old, it means it was built thousands of years before the Egyptian civilization even began. It would mean that a highly advanced group of people was living there during a time when we thought humans were still just hunter-gatherers. There is also an artifact called the Inventory Stela that was found near the pyramids. This is a stone tablet that tells a very different story about the Great Pyramid. It claims that the pharaoh Khufu did not actually build the Great Pyramid. Instead, it says he found the pyramid and the Sphinx already there and that they were in bad shape. According to the Stela, Khufu simply repaired them. Historians usually ignore this tablet because it was carved much later in Egyptian history. But it makes you wonder why the Egyptians themselves would write down that their most famous pharaoh was just a guy who did some home renovations on an ancient site. And the mysteries do not stop at the surface. There are rumors of a giant underground labyrinth that was once described by ancient Greek historians. A man named Herodotus visited Egypt about 2,500 years ago. He wrote about a building that was even more impressive than the pyramids. He described a massive 2-story complex with 3,000 rooms. Half of the rooms were above ground and the other half were beneath it. He said the holes were so complex that you would get lost without a guide. For a long time, archaeologists thought Herodotus was just making things up or exaggerating. But in 2008, a team of researchers used ground-penetrating radar at a site in Hawara. This technology sends radio waves into the soil to find hidden objects. The radar showed a massive grid of stone walls and chambers hidden deep under sand. It looked exactly like the labyrinth Herodotus described. But even after this discovery, no major excavation has taken place. The Egyptian government has been very cautious about letting people dig there. Some believe they are afraid of what might be found. If a massive pre-Egyptian city exists underground, it would change everything we know about human history. You see, there is a common theme in all these discoveries. We see high technology mixed with primitive tools. It is like seeing a modern computer sitting inside a medieval castle. In many Egyptian sites, you can see stones that were clearly worked with high-speed drills. There are core holes in granite blocks where the drill bits seem to have cut through the rock faster than our modern drills can. You can see the spiral marks left behind in the stone. Scientists have measured these marks and found that the drill was biting into the granite with incredible force. When you put all these clues together, you get a picture of a lost chapter in the human story. We usually think of history as a straight line. We started as simple cavemen and slowly got smarter and more advanced until we reached where we are today. But these whispers from beneath the Giza Plateau suggest something else. They suggest that our history might be cyclical. Maybe an advanced civilization reached a peak thousands of years ago, and then something happened to make them disappear. Maybe they were hit by a global catastrophe like a massive flood or a comet strike. If that happened, all their technology would have been lost. Only their most massive stone structures would have survived the test of time. Then thousands of years later, the ancient Egyptians found these ruins and decided to live among them. They built their own temples and painted their own stories on the walls. They were like people living in the ruins of a fallen empire. They honored the ancient builders and tried to mimic their style, but they did not have the same tools. This would explain why the oldest buildings in Egypt are often the most perfectly built, while the newer ones are smaller and less precise. It is a real brain teaser for researchers. We are used to things getting better over time, but in Egypt it looks like things started at a peak and then slowly got worse. Think about it for a second. The Great Pyramid is the largest and most perfect structure in the country. The pyramids built after it are much smaller, and many of them have crumbled into piles of rubble. It is as if the knowledge was slowly fading away. So now scientists are racking their brains trying to figure out who these original builders were. Were they the survivors of Atlantis? Or were they just a group of humans who figured out how to use the laws of physics in a way we have forgotten? Whatever the truth is, new technology is helping us peel back the layers of sand. Every time we use a satellite or a radar or muon scan, we find something new. We are finding that the ground beneath our feet is full of secrets that have been hidden for 10,000 years. The more we look, the more we realize that the ancient world was not as simple as we once thought. There were engineers and scientists living in the shadows of prehistory. They were moving stones that weigh as much as whole buildings and cutting rock that is as hard as diamond. They were building a legacy that would last long after their names were forgotten. And now we are finally starting to hear the whispers of what they left behind. But this is just the beginning of our journey into the past. There are many more mysteries waiting for us in the deep tunnels and hidden chambers of the ancient world. So keep your eyes on the sand, because the truth is out there and it is older than we ever imagined. Imagine you are an archaeologist working in the blistering heat of the Egyptian desert. You have spent years brushing away sand from broken pottery and limestone fragments. You expect to find the usual things like flint tools, copper pins, or maybe a bit of gold if you are lucky. But then you see something that makes your heart stop. Poking out of a layer of sediment that has been sealed for over 5,000 years is a small gray object. It does not look like a rock, and it definitely does not look like copper. You pull it out and realize it is a piece of metal. But here's the kicker. It is not rusted. It is not corroded. It looks like it just came off a factory assembly line in the year 2024. This is not a fairy tale or a movie plot. This is a reality of a discovery that is currently sending shockwaves through the scientific community. The object was found near the base of a pre-dynastic structure that predates the first pharaoh by hundreds of years. At first, the team thought it was modern trash left behind by a tourist. It happens all the time. But when they looked closer, they realized the metal was embedded deep within the ancient strata. It was literally part of the geological record. This fragment was sent to a high-tech lab in Switzerland for a full chemical workup. The researchers, they use a technique called scanning electron microscopy. This allows them to look at the surface of the metal at a microscopic level to see how it was formed. What they found was enough to make them drop their clipboards. The piece of metal was an alloy. Now an alloy is a mixture of two or more metals to create something stronger or more durable. In the ancient world, people made bronze by mixing copper and tin. That was the height of their technology. But this anomalous alloy was made of aluminum, magnesium, and a tiny bit of manganese. Now let us pause for a second and think about that. Aluminum was not discovered by modern humans until 1825. Even then it was so hard to produce that it was more valuable than gold for decades. To extract aluminum from, or you need a massive amount of electricity and a process called electrolysis. This requires a sophisticated power grid and chemical knowledge that we did not have until the Industrial Revolution. Yet here was a piece of high-grade aluminum alloy buried in a layer of earth from 3500 before the Common Era. Talk about a headache for historians. But wait, there's more. The scientists did not just look at what was in the metal. They looked at how it was shaped. When you look at the fragment under a microscope, you can see very specific marks. These are not the marks of a hammer and an anvil. They are the marks of high-speed machining. We are talking about microscopic grooves that suggest the metal was cut by a tool spinning at thousands of rotations per minute. It looks exactly like the shavings you would find on the floor of an aerospace engineering plant. And let me tell you, that is a very big problem for the standard version of history. We are taught that the people of this era were just beginning to move away from stone tools. How could they have tools that spin faster than a modern dentist drill? This discovery has reopened the debate about the true age of civilization in Egypt. Some researchers believe that there was a lost era before the pharaohs that they call the first time, or the Zep-Tepi. According to ancient Egyptian legends, their land was ruled by gods and demigods for thousands of years before the first human king took the throne. For a long time, historians dismissed these stories as myths. They thought the Egyptians were just making up a fancy backstory for their culture. But when you start finding aerospace-grade alloys in the dirt, you have to start wondering if those myths were actually based on real events. Could there have been an advanced civilization that was wiped out by a global catastrophe? And did they leave behind these little metallic breadcrumbs for us to find? The skeptics, of course, have their own theories. They always do. Some suggest that the metal could be a piece of a meteorite. It is true that ancient people sometimes used meteoric iron to make daggers and jewelry. King Tut even had a dagger made from a meteorite. But here's the problem with that theory. Aluminum and magnesium do not occur in nature as pure alloys like this. Meteorites are usually made of iron and nickel. You do not just find a block of processed aluminum falling out of the sky. This metal was clearly manufactured. It was cooked in a furnace and mixed with precise measurements. This implies a level of standardization and industrial capacity that is totally missing from our records of the ancient world. Now let us look at a location where this was found. It was discovered near the site of Nabta Playa. This is an ancient site in the Nubian desert that contains a prehistoric stone circle. Some experts believe it is the oldest astronomical observatory in the world. The stones are aligned with the stars as they appeared over 7,000 years ago. The people who built Nabta Playa clearly had a deep understanding of mathematics and the movement of the heavens. If they could track the stars with such precision, is it really that much of a stretch to think they could have mastered metalworking too? Or maybe they were the students of a much older and more advanced group that had already mastered the physical world. This brings us to the old problem, but with a metallic twist. In archaeology, we often have trouble dating things because objects can get moved around by floods or burrowing animals. But this metal piece was found in a pocket of undisturbed soil. There were no signs of tunneling or modern interference. The chemical patina on the outside of the metal suggested it had been sitting there for thousands of years. Metals develop a thin layer of oxidation over time, and the thickness of this layer can tell us how long it has been exposed to the elements. The scientists estimated the age of the oxidation layer to be at least 5,000 years old. This matches the age of the surrounding artifacts perfectly. If this metal is indeed 5,000 years old, it changes everything we know about the progression of human technology. We usually think of history as a straight line. We started with rocks, then we found copper, then we found iron, and then we finally got to the modern age. But what if history is more like a circle? What if civilizations rise to a peak and then collapse back into the Stone Age? This piece of metal suggests that someone a long time ago had reached the peak, and we are only now catching up to them. It is a humbling thought. We like to think we are the smartest people to ever live on this planet. But a tiny scrap of aluminum from the Egyptian desert says otherwise. But there's another mystery tied to this alloy. When the researchers analyzed the crystal structure of the metal, they noticed it was incredibly stable. Usually when you mix aluminum and magnesium, the metal can become brittle over time. But this sample was different. It had a molecular structure that seemed to be designed to resist fatigue. This is exactly the kind of thing we use today in construction of high-performance jets and spacecraft. It is designed to handle extreme pressure and temperature changes. Why would a pre-Egyptian culture need metal that could survive a trip to the upper atmosphere? Unless, of course, they were actually using it for something that involved flight. Now I know what you are thinking. Ancient airplanes in Egypt? It sounds like something out of a late-night television show. But there are other clues that point in this direction. Have you ever heard of the Saqqara bird? It is a small wooden object found in a tomb in 1898. It looks exactly like a modern glider. It has wings and a tail fin that are aerodynamically correct. When scientists built a scale model of the Saqqara bird, it actually flew. Then you have the Abydos carvings, which show shapes that look remarkably like helicopters and tanks. For years, people have called these things coincidences or misinterpretations of hieroglyphs. But when you add a piece of aerospace metal into the mix, those coincidences start to look like a pattern. The team that found the alloy is currently looking for more pieces. They believe that if there is one fragment, there must be a whole workshop buried somewhere nearby. They are using ground-penetrating radar to scan the area for more metallic signatures. But it is not easy. The desert is a harsh place, and thousands of years of shifting sands can hide a lot of secrets. They are also dealing with a lot of pushback from the academic world. Many mainstream historians are afraid of what this discovery means. If they admit that an advanced civilization existed before Egypt, it means they have to rewrite every textbook they have ever written. And let me tell you, people do not like being told they are wrong. The implications of this metal are huge. It suggests that our ancestors or whoever was living there before them had access to power sources we can only guess at. You cannot smelt aluminum with a wood fire. You need high-voltage electricity. Where did that electricity come from? Did they have primitive batteries, or did they have something even more advanced like solar power or electromagnetic generators? There are theories that the pyramids themselves were actually giant power plants. Some researchers point to the traces of chemicals like hydrochloric acid and zinc that have been found in the internal shafts of the Great Pyramid. If you put those chemicals together, you can create a reaction that generates energy. If they had power, they had the ability to manufacture materials that seem like magic to us. As we move forward, we have to keep an open mind. We are finding more and more of these out-of-place artifacts every year. From the Antikythera mechanism to the nanostructures found in the Ural Mountains, our planet is full of things that do not fit the narrative. This anomalous alloy found in Egypt is just the latest piece of the puzzle. It reminds us that we are not the first people to look up at the stars and wonder what is possible. It tells us that the history of humanity is much longer and much more complicated than we ever dreamed. So the next time you look at a picture of the pyramids, do not just think of them as big stone tombs. Think of them as the remnants of a world that might have been just as advanced as our own. Think of the builders who might have been using tools made of aluminum and titanium. And think about what else might be waiting for us deep under the sand. The Earth is a giant library of lost knowledge, and we have only just begun to read the first page. We are standing on the shoulders of giants, and it is about time we started to recognize who those giants really were. The truth is buried in the layers of the past, and it is waiting for someone with enough curiosity to dig it up. Every discovery like this brings us one step closer to understanding our true origins and the incredible heights that human civilization has reached before. The story is far from over, and the next chapter is going to be even more amazing. Stay tuned, because the deeper we go, the more we find that the past is actually the future. When we think about ancient Egypt, we usually think about the massive pyramids and the mysterious Sphinx. But if you head about 12 miles south of the Great Pyramid, you will find something even more mind-blowing. It is called the Serapeum of Saqqara. This is a massive underground tunnel system. It was carved out of solid limestone bedrock. Inside there are 24 giant stone boxes. These are not just any boxes. They are made from red and black granite, or even harder stones like diorite and basalt. Each one weighs between 70 and 100 tons. Now here's the kicker. These stones were not found in Saqqara. They were quarried in Aswan, which is over 500 miles away. Imagine trying to move a 100-ton block of granite across 500 miles of desert and river. Then imagine lowering it into a narrow underground tunnel. The tunnels are barely wider than the boxes themselves. There is not enough room for hundreds of men to stand and pull on ropes. There is not even enough room for modern machinery to fit. Yet these boxes are there, and they have been there for thousands of years. But the real mystery is the precision. If you take a high-precision square and place it against the inside corners of these boxes, you will see they are perfectly 90 degrees. I am talking about a level of flatness that we struggle to achieve today without laser-guided machines. The surfaces are so smooth they feel like glass or a polished mirror. Mainstream historians tell us that the ancient Egyptians did this using copper chisels and stone hammers. But granite is one of the hardest stones on Earth. It is much harder than copper. Trying to cut granite with a copper chisel is like trying to cut a thick steak with a plastic spoon. It just does not work. The spoon will break before the steak does. This has led many researchers to believe that there was a much older civilization. They believe this group had access to some kind of advanced power tools. We might be looking at evidence of machining that happened long before the first pharaoh ever sat on a throne. Another cool find that supports this idea comes from the work of Sir William Flinders Petrie. He was a famous archaeologist who lived about 100 years ago. He was the first to really look at the marks left on the stone instead of just looking at the statues themselves. In Aswan, he found granite blocks that had been drilled into, but these were not messy holes made by a hand drill. They were perfect circular cuts known as core drills. When Petrie measured the grooves in the stone, he realized something shocking. The drill was cutting through the granite with incredible speed. He calculated that the drill was biting into the hard rock 500 times faster than modern diamond drills could at the time. He wrote that the ancient builders must have been using some kind of ultrasonic drilling technology or high-pressure rotating tools. There is simply no way to get those results with a hand tool. You can even see the spiral grooves in the stone. They are perfectly even. This means the tool was moving at a constant speed and with constant pressure. That is a hallmark of a machine, not a human hand. We find these core drill holes all over Egypt. They are in the basalt floors near the pyramids and on the massive blocks at the Temple of Karnak. But let us shift our focus to India. There are these things called the Barabar caves. They are carved directly into huge granite boulders on a hillside. When you step inside, it is like walking into a high-tech laboratory. The walls are polished so perfectly that they reflect light like a mirror. The precision of the curves and the angles is something we would expect from a CNC machine. The acoustics in these caves are also strange. If you make a sound, the echo lasts for a very long time and vibrates in a specific way. It feels like the whole cave was designed as a giant resonator. The people who lived there thousands of years ago were mostly monks. Historians say they carved these caves by hand for meditation. But why would you spend decades polishing granite to a mirror finish just to sit in the dark? And how did they keep the dimensions so perfect? Some researchers think these caves are actually much older than the inscriptions found on them. They think an advanced civilization built them for a technical purpose, and later cultures just moved in and left their own graffiti on the walls. This is something we see a lot in archaeology. It is called the Oldwood problem, or the reuse of sites. Now let us go back to Egypt and talk about the unfinished obelisk in Aswan. It is a massive piece of granite that is still attached to the bedrock. If it had been finished, it would have weighed about 1,200 tons. That is heavier than 3 Boeing 747 planes. The work stopped because a crack appeared in the stone. But if you look at the trenches around the obelisk, they do not look like they were made by men hitting stone with other stones. They look like they were scooped out. It is as if someone took a giant ice cream scooper and just carved out the granite while it was soft. There are no chisel marks, just smooth undulating scoops. This has led to a very wild theory. Some scientists think the ancient people had a way to soften stone. There are legends in South America and Egypt about a special plant extract that could make rock as soft as clay. If you could soften the stone, you could just mold it or scoop it out and then let it harden again. This would explain why some of the walls in Peru at places like Cusco look like the stones were melted together. They fit so tightly that you cannot even slide a piece of paper between them. They are not held together by mortar. They are held together by a perfect fit. But if there was an advanced civilization, why have we not found their machines? This is a question that critics always ask. Where are the gears and the motors? Well, we have to remember how much time has passed. Most of our modern machines are made of steel and plastic. If our civilization disappeared today, steel would rust away in a few hundred years. Plastic would break down eventually. The only thing that would be left after 10,000 years is a stone. We are looking at the output of the machines even if the machines themselves are gone. Actually, we might have found a piece of their tech, and we just did not recognize it. Take the Antikythera mechanism, for example. It was found in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece. It is a complex system of gears that can predict the movements of the stars and the planets. It is essentially an ancient computer. For a long time, historians thought nothing like this existed until the 14th century. But this device is over 2,000 years old. If the Greeks had this, what else did they have? And what did the people before them have? There is a famous tablet in Egypt called the Inventory Stela. It was found near the Great Sphinx. Mainstream historians often ignore it because it says something that ruins their timeline. The Stela claims that the pharaoh Khufu did not build the Great Pyramid. It says he found the pyramid and the Sphinx already there and he just repaired them. If this is true, then the pyramids are much older than 4,500 years. They could be 10,000 or even 12,000 years old. This would place them right at the end of the last ice age. This was a time when the world was going through massive changes. Sea levels were rising and the climate was shifting. This is the same time period that Plato talked about when he described the fall of Atlantis. Maybe Atlantis was not just one city, but a global civilization that had mastered stone working and engineering. When the Great Flood happened, their cities were destroyed and their technology was lost. The survivors would have been scattered across the world. They would have tried to rebuild using what they had left. This would explain why we see similar stone building styles in Egypt, Peru, and India. They were all trying to copy the same ancient blueprints. When we look at the Great Pyramid, we see over 2 million stones. Each one weighs several tons. The precision is so high that the base of the pyramid is leveled to within a fraction of an inch. The pyramid is also aligned to true north more accurately than the Greenwich Observatory was in the 19th century. How do you do that without modern surveying equipment? How do you keep the angles perfect as you build up to a height of 480 feet? Some engineers have looked at the Great Pyramid and said it looks more like a machine than a tomb. It has narrow shafts that point to specific stars. It is made of granite and limestone, which has specific electrical properties. It sits on a massive limestone shelf that has underground water running beneath it. Some people think the pyramid was a power plant that used the vibration of the earth to create energy. This sounds like science fiction, but the more we study the precision of the construction, the more it makes sense. These were not people who were just experimenting with hammers and chisels. These were masters of physics and geometry. We also have to look at the statues. In the Cairo Museum, there are statues made of diorite and schist. These are stones that are almost as hard as diamond. Yet the facial features are perfectly symmetrical. If you take a photograph of the statue of Ramses and flip one half over, it matches the other side perfectly. It is a mirror image. You cannot achieve that level of symmetry by hand. If you make one tiny mistake with a chisel, you have to start all over again. But these statues are perfect. This suggests they were made using a lathe or pre-programmed carving machine. It really makes you rack your brain trying to figure it out. We like to think that history is a straight line of progress. We think we are the smartest people to ever live. But these ancient sites tell a different story. They suggest that humanity has reached a high level of technology before and then lost it. We are like a person with amnesia trying to remember who we were. We see these giant stones and these perfect cuts, and we know deep down that we are missing a huge part of the story. As we continue to use new technology like ground-penetrating radar and AI to analyze these sites, we are going to find more clues. We are finding tunnels under the pyramids and hidden chambers in the mountains of South America. Every time we look closer, we find more precision. We find more evidence that the builders knew things about the Earth and the stars that we are only just rediscovering. Maybe the technology they used was not based on electricity and oil like ours. Maybe it was based on sound and frequency. We know that sound can levitate small objects in a lab today. It is called acoustic levitation. If you had a way to use sound on a massive scale, could you move a 100-ton block? It sounds crazy, but it would explain how they moved the stones at Baalbek or Saqqara without leaving real marks or footprints. The more we look at the precision beyond the chisel, the more we realize that the ancient world was a lot more crowded and a lot more advanced than we were ever told in school. We are not just looking at the ruins of a primitive people. We are looking at the fingerprints of a lost high technology. And those fingerprints are carved in the hardest stone on earth, waiting for us to finally read the message they left behind. So let us keep our eyes open, because the next discovery might just change everything we know about where we came from. When we think of ancient Egypt, we usually think of the great pyramids and the gold masks of the pharaohs. But what if the story we are being told is just the latest chapter of a much older book? Most historians say that Egyptian civilization began around 3100 before the Common Era, when a king named Menes united the land. Before that, they say there were just simple farmers and hunters living in small villages along the Nile. But there's a growing group of researchers and geologists who say that the physical evidence tells a very different story. They believe that before the pharaohs there was a much more advanced culture that left behind monuments we still cannot explain today. This brings us to a topic that has sparked a huge debate in the world of archaeology. It is the problem of dating the impossible. One of the biggest mysteries sits right in the heart of the Giza Plateau. It is the Great Sphinx. 4-year school books have taught us that the Sphinx was carved by Pharaoh Khufu around 2500 before the Common Era. They say it was meant to be his face guarding his pyramid. But in the 1990s, a geologist named Robert Schoch from Boston University took a close look at the limestone walls around the Sphinx. He noticed something that shocked him. The erosion on the body of the Sphinx and the enclosure walls did not look like it was caused by wind and sand. It looked like it was caused by thousands of years of heavy rainfall. Now here's the problem. Egypt has been a dry desert for over 5,000 years. The last time there was enough consistent heavy rain to cause that kind of deep vertical erosion was at the end of the last ice age. That would put the age of the Sphinx at 10,000 years old, or maybe even older. If that is true, it means someone was in Egypt building giant monuments thousands of years before the first pharaoh even existed. Mainstream archaeologists were not happy about this. They argue that the erosion could have been caused by rising groundwater or salt. But Schoch and other researchers like John Anthony West pointed out that the erosion patterns are very specific. You can see how the water ran down the sides of the stone and carved out deep channels. This kind of weathering only happens with a lot of precipitation. If the Sphinx is really that old, it changes everything we know about the timeline of human history. It would mean that a civilization capable of massive engineering projects existed at a time when we were supposed to be just simple hunter-gatherers. But the Sphinx is not the only shadow from the pre-dynastic past. If we travel 300 miles south of Cairo, we find the ancient city of Abydos. This place is famous for the temple of Seti I, which is filled with beautiful hieroglyphs and art. But right behind that temple is something truly bizarre. It is called the Osirian. This structure is built at a much lower level than the surrounding temples. In fact, it was discovered by accident in 1902 by Margaret Murray and Flinders Petrie while they were excavating. It was buried deep under the sand. When they cleared it away, they found a massive building made of red granite blocks. These blocks are huge. Some of them weigh over 100 tons. What makes the Osirian so strange is its style. It has no hieroglyphs carved into its original walls. It has no decorations and no pharaoh names from the time of Seti. The design is very minimalist and heavy. It looks exactly like the Valley Temple next to the Sphinx at Giza. The style is called Cyclopean masonry. This involves using massive stones that are fitted together perfectly without any mortar. It is a completely different architectural language than what we see in the rest of Abydos. Most mainstream scholars say Seti I built it as a cenotaph or a symbolic tomb for the god Osiris. But many researchers argue that Seti actually built his temple on top of this much older site. They think the Osirian was already thousands of years old when Seti found it, and he just cleared the sand away. This leads us to a massive technological gap that is hard to ignore. When we look at the artifact from the pre-dynastic period, we see things like flint knives and simple pottery. These people were skilled, but they were using Stone Age tools. Then suddenly the first dynasties appear, and we see 100-ton granite blocks being moved and carved with incredible precision. How do you go from making a clay jar to moving a stone the size of a house overnight? It is like going from a horse and buggy to a space shuttle in one generation. Some people think that the early Egyptians did not invent this technology. They think they inherited it from an older civilization that lived in the Nile Valley long before. There is a piece of evidence that supports this idea, and it is called the Inventory Stela. This is a stone tablet found at Giza in the 19th century. It claims that Pharaoh Khufu, who is supposed to be the builder of the Great Pyramid, actually just repaired the Sphinx and a temple of Isis that were already standing on the plateau. Mainstream historians say the stela is a fake or a later creation from the 26th dynasty meant to create a sense of history. But why would they write that if it was not true? It seems like the ancient Egyptians themselves were trying to tell us that the monuments were already there when they arrived. Another amazing site that points to an advanced pre-dynastic culture is Nabta Playa. This is located deep in the Nubian desert, about 60 miles west of Abu Simbel. It is a stone circle that looks like a miniature Stonehenge. For a long time it was just a pile of rocks and sand. But in the 1970s, an archaeologist named Fred Wendorf realized it was actually a sophisticated astronomical calendar. This site is dated to at least 7,000 years ago. That makes it much older than the pyramids. The stones are aligned to the summer solstice and to specific stars like Sirius and Orion. This proves that the people living in the desert thousands of years before the pharaohs already had a deep understanding of the stars and mathematics. They were not just wandering around. They were scientists and engineers. Now, you might be wondering how we date these stone structures in the first place. This is a big part of the problem. We use radiocarbon dating for things like wood or charcoal or bone. But you cannot radiocarbon date a rock. Rocks are millions of years old to begin with. So when an archaeologist says a temple is 4,000 years old, they are usually dating the organic trash found inside it. They look at the pottery or the bits of wood left by the people who lived there. But what if those people just moved into an existing building? It is like someone finding your house 5,000 years from now and dating it based on the soda can you left on the porch. They would think you built the house today, but the house might be 100 years old. This is known as the old wood problem, but it applies to stone too. In the case of the Sphinx, researchers have found that the pharaohs of the New Kingdom like Thutmose IV did extensive repairs on it. They even put a stone tablet between its paws to celebrate the wake. But that does not mean they built it. It just means they were taking care of it. If we look at the oldest stone masonry in Egypt, like the granite casing stones on the lower part of the third pyramid at Giza, we see something incredible. Many of these stones are unfinished. They have bumps and protrusions called bosses left on the surface. We see these same bosses on ancient walls in Peru and in Turkey. It is a signature of a very specific type of ancient engineering. It is almost as if the same group of builders was traveling around the world using the same techniques long before the rise of our known civilizations. Ancient Egyptian legends actually speak of a time called Zep-Tepi. This translates to the first time. In their own records, like the Royal Canon of Turin and the Palermo Stone, they list a series of divine beings and demigods who ruled Egypt for tens of thousands of years before the human kings took over. Modern historians dismiss this as pure mythology. They say it is just a way for the pharaohs to claim they are related to gods. But what if those legends were based on real memories? What if there really was a golden age of technology and wisdom that was lost during a global catastrophe? If we look at the geology of the world, at the end of the last ice age about 11,600 years ago, there was a period of massive flooding and climate change. This is exactly the same time that Robert Schoch says the Sphinx was being eroded by heavy rain. It is also the same time that Plato says the island of Atlantis disappeared under the waves. It seems like all these different clues are pointing to the same date. Something happened to humanity at the end of the Ice Age that wiped the slate clean. The survivors might have been the ones who brought the knowledge of stone cutting and astronomy to the people of the Nile. This would explain why the earliest dynastic monuments often look more advanced than the later ones. Usually a civilization gets better at building over time. But in Egypt, the biggest and most precise pyramids are the oldest ones. By the time of the Middle Kingdom, the pyramids were being built with mud bricks instead of massive granite. They were smaller and they fell apart much faster. It looks like the knowledge was being lost rather than gained. It is a downward slope of technology, which is the opposite of what we usually see in history. So when we look at the pre-dynastic shadows, we are looking at a riddle that is carved in stone. We see massive blocks move with ease and precision that we would struggle to match today. We see astronomical alignments that required centuries of observation. And we see erosion that speaks of a time when the desert was green and lush. The more we look at the dating of these sites, the more the mainstream timeline starts to feel too short. It is like trying to fit a giant into a small suit. The suit is going to rip at the seams eventually. Scientists are now using new technology like cosmic ray muon sensors to look inside the pyramids and ground-penetrating radar to look under the Sphinx. They are finding voids and tunnels that have never been opened. Some people believe that these hidden chambers might hold the actual records of this lost civilization. They call it the Hall of Records. If we ever find it, it might finally give us the dates we are looking for. It might show us that humanity is not just a few thousand years old, but has a history that goes back to the stars. Until then, we are left to wonder about the builders who stood in the Nile Valley before the first hieroglyph was ever written. They left their mark in the hardest stones on earth, and they did it with a confidence that suggests they knew their work would last forever. They were the masters of a world we are only just beginning to rediscover. Every time we find a new stone circle in the desert or a buried temple under the sand, we are adding a piece to the puzzle. We are starting to realize that the pre-dynastic period was not a time of primitive shadows, but a time of forgotten light. The story of Egypt is much deeper than the names of the pharaohs. It is a story of survival and the preservation of knowledge across thousands of years of chaos. As we continue to study the erosion on the Sphinx and the granite blocks of the Osirian, we are forced to ask ourselves a difficult question. Are we the first advanced civilization to live on this planet, or are we just the latest ones to wake up among the ruins of the past? The stones are waiting for us to find the answer. They have all the time in the world, but we are just getting started. Imagine walking through the desert and finding a stone that has been standing for 7,000 years perfectly aligned to the stars. You would feel a connection to the people who put it there. You would realize that they were thinking about the same things we think about today. They were looking at the same sky and asking the same questions. They wanted to be remembered, and they wanted to understand their place in the universe. That is a true legacy of the pre-dynastic age. It is not just about the mystery of how they built it, but the mystery of who they were. As we move forward into the next part of our journey, we are going to look even closer at the specific tools and techniques that might have been used. We are going to look at the strange marks left on the stone and the secret math hidden in the dimensions of the monuments. The shadows of the past are long, but the light of discovery is getting brighter every day. We are peeling back the layers of time one stone at a time, and what we are finding is changing the way we see ourselves. It turns out that the impossible might just be a matter of perspective and the right date. Welcome to the shadows of the past. When we think of ancient Egypt, we usually think of the Great Pyramids and the golden mask of the pharaohs. But if you look a little closer at the stones themselves, you might find something that does not fit the history books. Scientists have been exploring the Giza Plateau for centuries, and lately they have found evidence of a technology that seems way ahead of its time. We are talking about precision that is so perfect it looks like it was done with modern machinery. Some researchers believe that before the Egypt we know today, there was an even older and more advanced civilization that left behind what they call geometrical ghosts. These are structures that are so complex they challenge everything we thought we knew about the human story. Let us start our journey at a place called the Osirian. It is located in Abydos, and it is one of the most mysterious sites in the world. To see it, you actually have to look down. The Osirian is buried about 15 feet below the level of the other temples around it. It looks completely different from the traditional Egyptian style. While the temples above it are covered in beautiful carvings and hieroglyphs, the Osirian is made of massive, plain granite blocks. Some of these stones weigh over 100 tons. They are fitted together with incredible precision. There is no mortar used to hold them together, yet you cannot even fit a credit card between the cracks. Historians have been arguing for years about who built this. Some say it was made for Pharaoh Seti I, but many independent researchers disagree. They believe the Egyptians actually found the Osirian already buried in the sand and built their own temple on top of it. This would mean that the Osirian is a relic from a much older, lost civilization. But why would anyone build something so massive and so deep in the ground? One theory is that the Osirian was not just a temple, but a functional structure. The way the blocks are arranged looks more like a waterworks or a heavy-duty foundation than a place of worship. And the mystery does not stop in Egypt. If we travel across the ocean to South America, we find the same geometrical ghosts. In the high Andes of Bolivia, there's a site called Pumapunku. It is located near the ancient city of Tiahuanaco at an altitude of almost 13,000 feet. Pumapunku is famous for its H blocks. These are stones shaped like the letter H, and they look like they were mass-produced. Every angle is a perfect 90 degrees. The surfaces are as smooth as glass. Scientists have used modern tools to measure these blocks and found that the internal corners are so sharp they could only have been made with advanced cutting tools. There are also tiny drill holes that go deep into the granite. These holes are perfectly straight and consistent in diameter. For a long time, we thought ancient people used copper chisels and stone hammers. But you cannot cut granite with copper. Copper is a soft metal. To cut granite with such precision, you would need something much harder, like diamond or even laser technology. This brings us to a very controversial idea. Some engineers and scientists believe that these ancient builders use a form of sonic technology. They suggest that the stones were not cut by hand, but by using sound waves to vibrate the rock until it split along perfect lines. This sounds like science fiction, but we actually use similar technology today in industrial manufacturing. If you look at the stones in Pumapunku, you can see grooves that are only a few millimeters deep. They look like they were made by a high-speed router. Some researchers even suggest that the blocks were not carved at all. They believe the ancients might have used a chemical process to turn stone into a liquid form, which they then poured into molds. This is known as the geopolymer theory. It would explain how they were able to create such complex shapes and fit them together so tightly. But if they had this technology, where did it go, and why did it disappear? Now let us look at the Great Pyramid of Giza. We are often told it was a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu. But if you look at the engineering, it seems more like a machine. The pyramid is aligned to true north within 3/60ths of a degree. This is a level of accuracy that is hard to achieve even with modern GPS. The base of the pyramid is leveled to within less than an inch across 13 acres. Think about that for a second. They leveled a massive limestone plateau with almost perfect accuracy using only simple tools? It seems unlikely. Then there are the casing stones. Originally, the Great Pyramid was covered in highly polished white limestone. These stones were cut with such precision that they reflected the sun like a giant mirror. An engineer named Chris Dunn has studied the pyramid for decades. He found evidence of circular saw marks on some of the granite blocks inside. He also found granite cores that show a feed rate into the stone that is 500 times faster than what a modern diamond drill can achieve. This means that whoever made these holes was using a power source we do not fully understand. These geometrical ghosts are not just found in stone blocks. They are also found in the very shape of the earth. Some scientists have pointed out that the dimensions of the Great Pyramid are a scale model of the northern hemisphere of Earth. If you take the height of the pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. If you take the perimeter of the base and multiply it by the same number, you get the equatorial circumference. This number, 43,200, is not random. It is linked to the precession of the equinoxes, which is a slow wobble of the Earth on its axis. This suggests that the ancient builders had a deep understanding of astronomy and the size of our planet long before we think they did. If we head over to India, we find another piece of the puzzle. The Barabar caves are located in the Jehanabad district. These caves are carved directly into massive granite boulders. On the outside, they look fairly simple. But when you step inside, the walls are polished to a mirror finish. The geometry is perfect. The ceilings are curved in a way that creates a unique acoustic effect. If you make a sound inside the cave, it echoes for a long time in a very specific frequency. Scientists who have visited the site say the level of polish is equivalent to what we see on modern high-tech telescopes. This was supposedly done in the 3rd century before the Common Era. But once again, the tools of that time do not match the work. You cannot get a mirror polish on granite by rubbing it with sand and water for a few years. It requires a level of consistent, high-speed friction that only machines can provide. One of the most famous examples of this pre-Egyptian technology is the Sphinx. For a long time, we were told the Sphinx was built around 4,500 years ago. But in the 1990s, a geologist named Robert Schoch noticed something strange. He saw deep vertical fissures in the rock of the Sphinx and its enclosure. He realized that this type of erosion is caused by heavy, rolling rain. The problem is that Egypt has been a desert for thousands of years. The last time there was enough rainfall in Egypt to cause that kind of erosion was at the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago. This theory would push the age of the Sphinx back by thousands of years. It means that while the rest of the world was supposedly living in caves and hunting mammoths, there was a civilization in Egypt building massive monuments and studying the stars. These discoveries are changing the way we look at history. It is no longer just a story of slow progress from primitive hunters to modern humans. Instead, it looks like there were peaks and valleys. We might have reached a high level of technology thousands of years ago, only to lose it during a global catastrophe. Some scientists point to a period called the Younger Dryas, which happened around 12,800 years ago. They believe a comet impact caused massive floods and climate change, wiping out this advanced civilization and leaving only these stone ruins behind. These ruins are the geometrical ghosts that still haunt our modern world. Every time we find a new site or use a new type of technology like lidar to peer under the jungle canopy, we find more of these structures. In Indonesia, a site called Gunung Padang was recently dated to be over 20,000 years old. It is a massive terrace pyramid buried under a hill. Initial scans show that there are hidden chambers deep inside. If these dates are correct, it would be the oldest man-made structure on Earth. This would prove once and for all that we are a species with amnesia. We have forgotten a huge part of our own story. But the stones do not forget. They are still standing there, waiting for us to figure out how they were made. Historians and archaeologists are slowly becoming more open to these ideas. New technology like AI is helping us analyze the construction techniques and the mathematical patterns in these ancient sites. We are finding that these sites were often connected to each other across thousands of miles. They used the same units of measurement and the same astronomical alignments. It is like they were part of a global network. This network left behind a map of the stars and the Earth in the form of stone. As we continue to study these geometrical ghosts, we are not just learning about the past. We are learning about our own potential. If they could do such amazing things with stone, what else were they capable of? And what can we learn from them today? The architecture of the ancients is a puzzle that is finally starting to come together, and the picture it is showing us is truly incredible. Welcome to a part of history that you cannot see, but you can definitely hear. We have spent a lot of time looking at massive stones and giant pyramids, but now we need to look at the space inside them. It turns out that the people who built these ancient sites were not just great at moving rocks. They were also masters of sound. This is what we call acoustic engineering. Today, we use computers and microphones to design concert halls, but thousands of years ago, people were doing the same thing using nothing but stone and their own voices. Think about the last time you were in a big, empty room and you shouted just to hear your own voice bounce back. It is a fun thing to do, right? But what if those echoes were not just an accident? What if the architecture was designed to change your mind and your body through sound? Now, scientists are finding that many of these prehistoric sites were built to sound a certain way. This brings us to a place called the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum in Malta. This place is a massive underground complex carved into solid limestone, and it is over 5,000 years old. It has 3 different levels and dozens of rooms, but there is one specific room that has left researchers completely baffled. They call it the Oracle Chamber. If you stand in this room and speak in a low voice, your words will boom through the entire complex. It is like the room has its own built-in amplifier. But it gets even weirder than that. In the early 2000s, a team of researchers decided to test the acoustics of the chamber, and they found something incredible. The room is tuned to a very specific frequency of 110 hertz. When a man with a deep voice chants in that room, the sound creates a resonance that vibrates through your entire body. Scientists have found that this specific frequency actually shifts the activity in the human brain. It turns out that 110 hertz can switch off the part of the brain responsible for language and logic and turn on the part responsible for intuition and emotional processing. Imagine what that would have been like thousands of years ago. You would walk into a dark, underground cave and listen to a priest chant. Suddenly, your brain starts to change. You feel like you are in a trance. Was this some kind of ancient technology used to control or heal people? For many years, historians have been arguing about why the ancients went through so much trouble to carve these rooms out of rock. Now, it looks like the sound was the whole point. But Malta is not the only place where this is happening. Let us go over to Egypt and look at the Great Pyramid of Giza. Most people focus on the outside of the pyramid, but the king's chamber is where the real mystery is. This room is made entirely of red granite, which is a very dense and heavy rock. In the middle of the room, there is a stone box that we usually call a sarcophagus, but it does not look like any coffin you have ever seen. It is plain and has no decorations or writing on it. When you strike it, it does not make a thud. It actually rings like a bell. Some researchers believe that the entire pyramid was designed as a massive resonator. They think that the shafts leading out of the chamber were actually acoustic pipes. If you hit the right note, the entire structure could start to vibrate. This is where things get a bit like a science fiction movie. Granite contains a high amount of quartz crystals. When quartz is squeezed or vibrated, it produces electricity. This is called the piezoelectric effect. Could the ancients have been using sound to generate some kind of energy? Some engineers believe the king's chamber was a resonance chamber designed to vibrate at the frequency of the earth itself. While this sounds like a wild theory, the precision of the granite blocks is so high that it is hard to imagine it was all just for a tomb. The problem is that we do not have the instruction manual for the pyramid, so we have to guess based on the clues left behind. Now, let us shift our attention to Mexico, to the ancient city of Chichen Itza. There is a massive pyramid there called El Castillo. If you stand at the bottom of the pyramid and clap your hands, the echo that comes back does not sound like a clap at all. It sounds exactly like the chirp of a bird. Specifically, it sounds like the Quetzal bird, which the Maya people thought was sacred. Scientists have analyzed the sound waves and found that the steps of the pyramid are spaced out at the exact distance needed to create this specific echo. This was not an accident. To pull this off, the builders had to know the physics of sound waves perfectly. It is like they were recording a sound into the very stone of the building. But wait, it gets even more interesting. At the same site, there's a massive ball court where the Maya used to play games. It is 545 feet long and 225 feet wide. If you stand at one end of the court and whisper, someone standing at the very other end can hear you perfectly. There are no electronic speakers or wires, just the shape of the walls. This is what we call a whispering gallery. But this ball court is outdoors and has no roof. Usually, whispering galleries need a dome to work. Somehow, the builders of Chichen Itza figured out how to bounce sound of the wall so that it would travel hundreds of feet without losing its volume. It is a level of engineering that we are only just beginning to understand. Another amazing find comes from the highlands of Peru at a place called Chavindahuanta. This is a temple complex built over 3,000 years ago. Underneath the temple, there is a massive network of tunnels. For a long time, people thought these were just for drainage. But then, archaeologists found several large conch shells that had been carved into trumpets. When they blew these trumpets inside the tunnels, the sound mimicked the roar of a jaguar. Even more impressive is that they found a way to use the water from a nearby river. They channeled the water into the tunnel so that it would create a deep, pulsing sound that vibrated through the floor of the temple. The people standing above would feel the ground shaking and hear a roar coming from the earth. It was a massive, ancient sound system designed to create a religious experience that was literally earth-shaking. Scientists are now using new technology to map these acoustic effects. They use a technique called acoustic archaeology or archaeoacoustics. They take sensitive microphones into these ancient sites and record the ambient noise. They have found that many megalithic tombs in Ireland and the United Kingdom also have these 110 Hz resonances. At a place called Newgrange in Ireland, the stones were chosen and placed in a way that creates a very specific acoustic environment. The entrance of the tomb is so narrow that it acts like a filter for sound. When you are inside, the outside world disappears and the only thing you can hear is the low vibration of the earth or the sound of your own heartbeat. So, why did they do it? Some researchers believe it was for healing. We know that certain frequencies can reduce stress and help the body recover from injury. Others think it was about power. If a leader could step into a stone chamber and make their voice sound like the voice of a god, people would definitely listen to them. But there's also a deeper possibility. Maybe the ancients knew something about the relationship between sound and matter that we have forgotten. There are stories from all over the world about people moving massive stones using nothing but sound. While that sounds impossible, we do know that sound can be used to levitate small objects in modern labs. Could an advanced civilization have found a way to scale that up? The more we study these resonant chambers, the more it seems like the ancients were not just primitive farmers. They were scientists in their own right. They understood the human brain. They understood geology, and they understood the physics of vibration. They built their temples and pyramids to be more than just buildings. They were tools. They were machines made of stone that used sound to connect the human mind to the environment around it. This is not just art or decoration. This is high technology, but it is a type of technology that does not use wires or batteries. It uses the natural properties of the earth itself. As we continue to explore these deep, dark chambers, we are realizing that we have been looking at them all wrong. We have been looking at them with our eyes when we should have been listening with our ears. The echoes in the oracle chamber, the ringing granite of Egypt, and the chirping pyramids of Mexico are all pieces of a much larger puzzle. They show us a world where science and spirituality were the same thing. They show us that the ancients had a way of interacting with a world that was very sophisticated. We are only now starting to rack our brains trying to figure out how they did it. Every time a scientist claps their hands in an ancient tomb or a researcher records a frequency of a stone chamber, we get a little bit closer to the truth. We are finding that these sites are scattered all over the world, from the islands of the Pacific to the deserts of the Middle East. They all seem to share this common thread of acoustic mastery. It makes you wonder what else we have missed because we were not listening. The history of our world is not just written in books or carved in stone. It is ringing in the air of these ancient places, waiting for us to hear it. Now, all of these are clues, but scientists are cautiously optimistic that they can decode the purpose of these acoustic structures. We are starting to build computer models that can simulate how sound moves through these ancient spaces. These algorithms are helping us see the invisible patterns of energy that the builders intended to create. It is a groundbreaking field of study that is changing everything we thought we knew about the past. The technology of the ancients was not just about the things they could touch. It was about the things they could feel. The next time you visit an old stone building or a quiet cave, stop for a second and just listen. You might hear a whisper from a civilization that understood the power of the voice and the resonance of the earth. They left behind these stone instruments as a message, and after thousands of years, we are finally starting to pick up the signal. It is a story of sound, science, and the deep mysteries of the human mind, all hidden in the dark, resonant chambers of the past. It turns out that the silence of history is actually full of noise, if you only know how to listen. The architecture of the ancients is a puzzle of sound, and the more we hear, the more we realize just how advanced they truly were. Now we have to look at a moment in time that changed everything for our ancestors. For a long time, historians believed that human progress was a slow and steady climb. They thought we started as simple hunters and slowly learned how to farm and build. But new evidence is starting to tell a very different story. It suggests that a high level of civilization might have existed long before the ancient Egyptians. And the reason we do not see much of it today is because of a global catastrophe that almost wiped us off the map. This event is known as the Younger Dryas. It is a fancy name for a period of time that started about 12,800 years ago. At that time, the Earth was finally warming up after the last great ice age. The glaciers were melting, and the world was becoming a nice place to live. But then something happened. Suddenly, the temperature crashed. It got as cold as the peak of the ice age in just a few years. This cold snap lasted for about 1,200 years, and then it ended just as quickly as it began with a massive and sudden rise in temperature. Scientists have been scratching their heads trying to figure out what caused such a violent shift in the climate. One group of researchers believes the answer came from the sky. They found a very thin layer of sediment in the soil at over 50 sites across the world. This layer is often called the black mat. It dates exactly to 12,800 years ago. Inside this dirt they found things that really should not be there if everything was normal. They found tiny bits of diamonds that are so small you need a microscope to see them. They also found high levels of platinum and something called microspherules. These are tiny metallic droplets that form when rock is melted at extreme temperatures. These are the kinds of things you find at sites where a comet or an asteroid has hit the Earth. This led to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. The idea is that a giant comet entered our atmosphere and broke into pieces. Some of those pieces likely hit the massive ice sheets that covered North America and Europe at the time. Imagine a block of ice that is 2 miles thick and as big as a continent. Now imagine a piece of a comet hitting it while moving at thousands of miles per hour. The heat and energy would be unimaginable. It would have melted millions of tons of ice in an instant. This would have sent a massive amount of cold, fresh water rushing into the oceans. This likely stopped the ocean currents that move heat around the planet, which caused a sudden freeze. But the real problem for any advanced civilization was the flooding. If there were cities and ports near the coast, they would have been destroyed by giant waves and rising sea levels. Some geologists have studied an area in Washington state called the Scablands. They found evidence of floods so large that they make any modern flood look like a leaky faucet. These floods carved deep canyons into solid rock in just a few days. They were moving with a force of 10 times all the rivers in the world combined. If an advanced civilization existed before this, they were likely living on the coast. Most people today live near the ocean, and it was probably the same back then. When the ice melted, the sea levels rose by about 400 feet. Any city built on the shore would now be deep underwater. This could be why we have so many stories about a lost city like Atlantis or a great flood that covered the world. These stories exist in almost every culture, from the Greeks to the Maya and even the indigenous people of Australia. For years, historians said these were just myths. But now the geological evidence is starting to match the stories. It seems like the world really did end for the people living back then. They went from a world of stability to a world of fire and ice and water. This would explain why we only find small bits and pieces of their technology. The rest is buried under hundreds of feet of mud or lost at the bottom of the sea. But some things did survive. This brings us back to places like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. This site is incredibly strange because it appeared right as the Younger Dryas was ending about 11,600 years ago. It is made of massive stone pillars arranged in circles. The stones are carved with beautiful images of animals and strange symbols. Some of these pillars weigh over 20 tons. What is shocking is that there is no evidence of a simpler version of this site. It is as if the people there just woke up one day and knew how to move giant stones and carve them with perfect precision. Usually it takes thousands of years to learn those skills. Some researchers believe that Göbekli Tepe was not a new invention. Instead, it was a gift from the survivors of the catastrophe. They think a group of people who still had the knowledge of the old world decided to teach the hunters and gatherers how to build and farm. They were trying to restart civilization from the ashes. One of the most famous pillars of the site is known as the Vulture Stone. If you look closely at the carving, some experts believe they are actually a map of the stars. They think the symbols represent the constellations as they appeared 12,800 years ago. Even more amazing is that some believe the carvings tell the story of the comet hitting the Earth. It might be a warning carved in stone for future generations. They wanted us to know what happened to them so we would be prepared if it happened again. This would mean that the people who built Göbekli Tepe had an advanced understanding of astronomy. They knew how the stars moved over long periods of time, which is a very hard thing to track without writing or math. This connection to a lost civilization also shows up in Egypt. We often think of the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx as being built by the dynastic Egyptians about 4,500 years ago. But there are clues that some parts of these monuments might be much older. Take the Sphinx, for example. Most people think the erosion on its body was caused by wind and sand. But in the 1990s, a geologist named Robert Schoch looked at the Sphinx and saw something different. He noticed that the erosion patterns looked exactly like the damage caused by heavy rainfall. The problem is that it has not rained that much in Egypt for thousands of years. The last time Egypt had enough rain to cause that kind of erosion was during the end of the last ice age. This would suggest the Sphinx was already standing during the Younger Dryas. If that is true, then it was built by a civilization we know almost nothing about. It would also explain why the head of the Sphinx looks so small compared to its body. Many researchers think the original monument was a lion. After thousands of years of rain damage, the head would have been a mess. The Egyptians we know might have found it and recarved the head into the face of Pharaoh. This is why the head looks much newer and is not eroded like the rest of the body. If the Sphinx is actually 12,000 years old, it changes everything we thought we knew about history. It means that while our ancestors were supposed to be living in caves, some of them were actually building giant monuments with incredible precision. This civilization would have had tools and math and organization that we are only just beginning to understand. Think about the precision we see in the stone boxes of the Serapeum or the massive blocks at Baalbek. If these were built by a pre-Egyptian civilization, it makes more sense. They had the technology and they had the time. But the Younger Dryas was a great eraser. It wiped out their records and their cities. The few things that were left behind were reused by later cultures like the Egyptians and the Romans. They saw these giant stones and built their own temples on top of them. This is known as a palimpsest in history, where one layer of culture is written over another. We have been looking at the top layer and assuming it was the only one. But if we look deeper, we see the ghost of a much older world. This lost civilization might have also left clues in the way they aligned their buildings. Many of these ancient sites are lined up with the stars or the sun with perfect accuracy. At Stonehenge and the pyramids and even sites in South America, we see the same thing. They all seem to be obsessed with tracking time and the movement of the planets. It is as if they were watching the sky and waiting for the next disaster. They knew that the Earth is a dangerous place, and they wanted to leave a message that would last for thousands of years. Stone is the only thing that can survive the fire and the floods. Paper and wood and even metal will rot or rust away. But giant blocks of granite will still be there 10,000 years later. Now we are starting to find more of these sites under the water. Off the coast of India and Japan, divers have found structures that look like roads and walls and pyramids. These are located in areas that were dry land before the sea levels rose at the end of the Younger Dryas. If these are truly human-made, then they are the final proof of a lost world. We are living on a planet with a hidden history. The advanced technology we see in the ancient stones was not a miracle. It was a result of thousands of years of progress that was nearly lost forever. As we use new tools like satellites and ground-penetrating radar, we are finally pulling back the curtain. We are realizing that we are not the first advanced society to live on this planet. We are just the latest chapter in a much longer and more mysterious story. The Younger Dryas connection shows us that civilization is fragile. It can be erased by a single event from space. But it also shows us that human knowledge is hard to kill. It survives in the stones and the stories and the strange technology that still makes us scratch our heads today. Imagine you are standing in the middle of a vast and scorching desert. There is nothing but sand and heat for hundreds of miles in every direction. But then you look down and see a circle of heavy stones sitting right there in the date. At first glance, they might just look like random rocks. But if you look closer, you realize they are arranged in a very specific pattern. This place is called Nabta Playa, and it is hidden deep in the Sahara Desert in southern Egypt. For a long time, nobody really paid much attention to it. But in the 1970s, researchers started to realize that this was not just a pile of rocks. It was actually a giant prehistoric calendar and a star map. And here is the kicker. It is way older than the Great Pyramids. We are talking about stones that were placed there over 7,000 years ago. That means that thousands of years before the first pharaoh was even born, people were already using advanced math and astronomy to track the heavens. The people who built Nabta were nomads. They moved around a lot to find water and food. But every year they came back to this exact spot. Why would they do that? Well, it turns out that this circle of stones works like a giant clock. One set of stones points exactly to where the sun rises on the summer solstice. This was a huge deal back then because the summer solstice meant the start of the rainy season. Without that rain, their animals would die and they would have no food. So they needed a way to predict the future. But they did not just stop at the sun. Scientists found that the other stones in the circle aligned perfectly with certain stars in the sky. They were tracking the constellation of Orion and the star Sirius. This shows us that these ancient people had a deep understanding of how the Earth moves through space. They were not just primitive hunters. They were master astronomers who could read the sky like a book. Now let's travel even further back in time. We are going to head over to Turkey, to a place called Göbekli Tepe. You might have heard of it because it is often called the oldest temple in the world. It is about 12,000 years old. That is so old that it is hard to even wrap your brain around it. Back then, humans were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers who lived in caves. But at Göbekli Tepe, we found massive stone pillars that weigh up to 20 tons each. And on these pillars there are intricate carvings of animals and strange symbols. One specific pillar has become famous among people who study ancient mysteries. It is called the Vulture Stone, or Pillar 43. For years, scientists wondered what the carvings on this stone meant. There are images of a vulture, a scorpion, and a headless man. It sounds like a scene from a scary movie. But a few years ago, a team of researchers from the University of Edinburgh used a computer program to compare these carvings to the positions of the stars in the ancient sky. What they found was absolutely mind-blowing. They believe the carvings are actually a date stamp for a massive event that happened on Earth. According to their theory, the symbols represent constellations, and they show the position of the stars around the year 10,950 before the Common Era. This matches up perfectly with a period of time called the Younger Dryas. This was a time when the Earth suddenly got very cold and many large animals went extinct. Some scientists believe this happened because a comet hit the Earth. If the carvings on the Vulture Stone really are a record of a comet strike, it means that people 12,000 years ago were keeping detailed records of astronomical events. They were using stone pillars as a kind of hard drive to store information for future generations. It is kind of like a warning message from the past. They wanted us to know what happened so we could be prepared if it ever happened again. But how did they get the math so right? That is the big question that makes researchers scratch their heads. To map the stars with that kind of precision, you need to understand something called precession. This is a very slow wobble in the Earth's axis that changes how we see the stars over thousands of years. It takes about 26,000 years for the Earth to complete one full wobble. To notice this, you have to watch the stars and keep record for hundreds or even thousands of years. It is a very advanced concept that we used to think was only discovered by the ancient Greeks much later. But if these stone maps are correct, it means someone knew about it a long time before the Greeks were even around. This has led some people to believe that there was a lost civilization that was much more advanced than we think. They might have had tools in math that we still do not fully understand. Think about the precision it takes to move stones that weigh as much as 10 or 20 cars. You cannot just drag them through the mud and hope for the best. You have to have a plan. You have to have engineers. And most importantly, you have to have a reason. Why spend all that energy building a giant stone map in the middle of nowhere? Some researchers think these sites were part of a global network. They have found similar alignments in places like Stonehenge in England and even in the Americas. It is like the whole world was obsessed with the stars. Maybe they were trying to stay connected to something bigger than themselves. Or maybe they were using the stars to navigate across the oceans long before we thought it was possible. In many of these ancient cultures, there are stories about teachers who came from the stars or from across the sea to give them knowledge. They are often described as being very tall or having strange features. These teachers allegedly taught the locals how to farm, how to write, and how to build with stone. Could these legends be true? Could a group of survivors from an even older civilization have traveled around the world to restart society after a big disaster? If they did, they left their blueprints in the rocks. These star maps are not just art. They are functional technology. They are high-level calendars that never need batteries and never break down. Even after thousands of years of wind and rain and sand, they still point the way to the stars. Another amazing example of this can be found in a place called Tiwanaku in Bolivia. There is a famous structure there called the Gate of the Sun. It is carved from a single massive block of stone and is covered in mysterious symbols. For a long time, people thought it was just decoration. But a scientist named Arthur Poznansky spent decades studying it. He realized that the gate was actually a sophisticated solar calendar. It tracks the movement of the sun throughout the year with incredible accuracy. But there was a problem. The gate did not line up with the sun in our current time. Poznansky calculated that it would have been perfectly aligned around 15,000 years ago. That is even older than Göbekli Tepe. Most mainstream historians think he was wrong because they do not think humans could build like that so long ago. But the stones do not lie. They are cut with laser-like precision that is hard to explain without advanced tools. And it is not just the big monuments. We are finding smaller artifacts that show the same thing. Have you ever heard of the Nebraska disk? It was found in Germany, and it is made of bronze and gold. It shows the sun, the moon, and the Pleiades star cluster. It is about 3,600 years old. While that is younger than the stone circles, it is still one of the oldest portable maps of the cosmos ever found. It proves that even in Northern Europe, people were focused on the stars. They used this disk to align their lunar and solar calendars, which is a very tricky thing to do. It shows a level of sophistication that matches the stone maps in the desert. So what does all of this mean? It suggests that our history might be much longer and more complicated than the version we learn in school. We usually think of progress as a straight line. We started as cavemen, and then we learned to farm, and then we built cities, and now we have the internet. But what if progress goes in waves? What if there were advanced people thousands of years ago who reached a high level of technology, and then lost it all in a global catastrophe? These star maps carved in stone might be the only things they had left to tell their story. They chose stone because they knew it was the only material that would last for thousands of years. They knew that wood would rot and metal would rust. But stone can survive almost anything. Today we are using new technology like artificial intelligence and satellite imaging to find more of these sites. We are finding hidden structures under the sands of Egypt and in the jungles of Central America. Many of these sites also show astronomical alignments. It seems like everywhere we look we find proof that ancient people were obsessed with the sky. Maybe they knew something that we have forgotten. Maybe they knew that our fate is tied to the movement of the planets and the stars. By studying these stone maps, we are not just learning about the past. We might be relearning how to look at our own future. The next time you look up at the night sky, remember that thousands of years ago someone was doing the exact same thing. They were standing in the same spots and watching the same stars move across the horizon. They did not have telescopes or computers, but they had patience and they had stone. They carved their knowledge into the earth itself so that we could find it one day. And now as we start to decode these ancient star maps, we are beginning to see the true face of our ancestors. They were not just trying to survive. They were trying to understand the universe. And in many ways they might have understood it better than we do today. This technology of the past is still waiting for us to fully unlock its secrets. It is hidden in the silence of the stones and the beauty of the stars, and it is a reminder that we are part of a story that is much older and much more mysterious than we ever imagined. These stone maps are the breadcrumbs left behind by a civilization that reached for the stars long before we ever thought it was possible. Many people think that history is a straight line going from simple to complex. We like to believe that we started as hunter-gatherers and slowly worked our way up to building skyscrapers. But the more we dig into the sand of Egypt, the more we see things that do not fit that simple story. It is almost as if the ancient Egyptians did not just invent their civilization out of thin air. Instead, they might have been the inheritors of a much older and much more advanced legacy. If we look closely at the stones themselves, we can see the fingerprints of a lost horizon. Think about the Great Sphinx for a moment. It is the iconic symbol of ancient Egypt. Most school books tell us it was built by the pharaoh Khufu around 4,500 years ago. But if you look at the body of the Sphinx, you will see something very strange. It is covered in deep vertical grooves. Most mainstream experts say this is just wind and sand erosion. But in the 1990s, a geologist named Robert Schoch decided to take a closer look. He realized that wind erosion usually leaves horizontal marks. These vertical grooves look like they were made by thousands of years of heavy rainfall. Here is the problem. Egypt has been a desert for a very long time. For the Sphinx to have that much water damage, it would have to be much older than 4,500 years. It would have to date back to a time when Egypt was a green and rainy land. That would place its construction at least 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. That is long before the first pharaohs ever wore a crown. If this is true, it means the Egyptians did not build the Sphinx. They found it. They might have even repaired it and carved the head to look like a person. But the original structure was something else entirely. It was a monument left by a civilization that existed at the end of the last ice age. This idea of finding and reusing old technology is not as crazy as it sounds. We see evidence of it all over the Giza Plateau. When you walk around the Great Pyramid, you can see two very different types of masonry. Most of the pyramid is made of smaller, rough limestone blocks. This is the stuff that we know the Egyptians could handle. But then you see the foundation and the internal chambers. These are made of massive granite blocks that fit together with laser-like precision. Some of these blocks weigh 70 tons and were brought from a quarry hundreds of miles away. How did they lift these stones to a height of several hundred feet? Engineers today say it would be a nightmare even with our best cranes. And then there is the precision. Some of the granite boxes found inside the pyramids and at Saqqara are so perfect that you cannot even slide a piece of paper between the joints. Their surfaces are flatter than a professional pool table. When you measure them with precision tools, you find that they are accurate to within a few thousandths of an inch. That is the kind of accuracy we only get today with high-speed machining. It is not something you get by hitting a stone with another stone for a few months. Let us travel to a place called the Osirian. This site is located at Abydos right behind the beautiful temple of Seti I. When you walk through the temple of Seti, you see incredible art and detailed hieroglyphs. It is classic Egyptian work. But when you step out the back and look down into the Osirian, everything changes. The floor of the Osirian is located about 50 feet below the level of the surrounding temples. It is made of massive red granite pillars and lintels that look nothing like the rest of the site. There are no carvings on the original stones. There are no fancy decorations. It looks modern and industrial. The stones in the Osirian are some of the largest ever moved in Egypt. Some weigh over 100 tons. Mainstream historians say it was built for the god Osiris during the time of Seti. But why would the Egyptians build a temple 50 feet underground in a style that does not match anything else they were doing? It is more likely that the Osirian was already there when the Egyptians arrived. They found it buried in the sand and built their own temple next to it. It was a relic from a lost era. It was a piece of high technology that they respected but could not fully replicate. Now we should talk about the tools. We often find strange marks left behind on the granite blocks of Egypt. One of the most famous examples is a granite block at Giza that shows a clear circular saw mark. The cut is deep and straight. It looks exactly like what happens when a modern power saw gets stuck in a piece of wood. Then there are the drill holes. In many quarries we find holes drilled into solid granite. When scientists look at the grooves inside these holes, they find that the drill was biting into the rock with an incredible amount of force. A researcher named Christopher Dunn studied these marks and concluded that the ancient builders were using some kind of ultrasonic drilling technology. They were not just turning a drill by hand. They were using vibrations to melt through the stone like a hot knife through butter. We also find evidence of lathes. Some of the stone bowls and jars found in the oldest layers of Egyptian ruins are perfectly symmetrical. They are carved out of hard diorite and granite. Some are so thin that they are almost translucent. You cannot make a bowl like that with hand tools. You need a machine that can spin the stone at high speeds while a cutting tool shapes it. This leads us to the biggest mystery of all. If there was an advanced civilization before the Egyptians, where did they go? Many researchers believe that a global catastrophe hit the Earth about 12,000 years ago. This period is known as the Younger Dryas. During this time, the climate shifted violently and sea levels rose by hundreds of feet. This might have been the real story behind the legend of Atlantis. If a high-tech civilization was living along the coastlines, they would have been wiped out in a matter of weeks. The only things that would survive such a disaster are the massive stone structures built on high ground. The people who survived this catastrophe would have been scattered across the globe. They would have lost their machines and their factories. But they still had their knowledge. These survivors might have become the teachers of the ancient world. They are the ones described in myths as the gods who brought agriculture and law to the people. In Egypt, they called this period Zeptepi, or the first time. They said that Osiris and Isis were real people who taught them how to live. These were not gods from the sky. They were survivors from a lost horizon. When we look at sites like Pumapunku in Bolivia, we see the same thing. Huge stone blocks with complex geometric shapes that look like they were made in a factory. They have grooves and slots that suggest they were once part of a larger machine. Just like in Egypt, the local people who live there today say that the stones were built by the gods in a single night. This is a recurring theme all over the world. We find advanced masonry and precision engineering at the very beginning of the historical record. Instead of things getting better over time, they actually seem to get worse. The oldest pyramids are the best built. The oldest statues are the most detailed. This is what we call the inheritance problem. The Egyptians inherited the remnants of an older technology. They spent thousands of years trying to maintain it and copy it. But as the centuries went by, they lost the original knowledge. By the time the Greeks and Romans arrived, the skills were mostly gone. The Great Pyramid was already thousands of years old, and nobody knew exactly how it worked anymore. It became a tomb and a mystery instead of a functional piece of technology. Scientists today are starting to use technology like LIDAR and ground-penetrating radar to look deeper into the Earth. They are finding tunnels and chambers that have been hidden for millennia. In segment 10, we talked about the secret rooms under the Sphinx and the pyramids. These might be the places where the survivors store their records. They might have left a time capsule for us to find. If we can find the whole of records, we might finally understand the true history of our planet. We would learn that we are not the first advanced people to walk this earth. The artifacts we find today are just the tip of the iceberg. Imagine a world where people use sound to move stones and vibrations to cut through granite. It sounds like science fiction, but the evidence is written in the rocks. We see it in the 1,200-ton blocks at Baalbek and the perfectly polished boxes of the Serapeum. We see it in the precision of the Giza pyramids. These are not just monuments to dead kings. They are the leftovers of a high-tech era that we are only now beginning to understand. As we move forward, we need to be willing to question the old narrative. History is not a closed book. It is a mystery that is still being solved. Every time we find a new artifact or a hidden chamber, we get one step closer to the truth. We are the children of a lost civilization, and our ancestors left us a message in stone. They wanted us to know that even when the world ends, something survives. The horizon may be lost, but the inheritance remains. So keep your eyes on the ground and your mind open to the impossible. The next discovery might just rewrite everything we think we know about who we are and where we came from.